Pete Wishart.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And it's a real pleasure to follow the right honourable gentleman. It's obvious with his appearance here on a Friday morning that the government's loss is a Friday backbench business gain. But I've sensed that the lemons were bristling a little bit as he was unkindly referring to some of his honourable backbenchers in the course of this debate. And I'm sure they will be able to respond in kind to the right honourable gentleman as he participates in these debates. Can I first of all say, Madam Speaker, to the honourable lady for North East Durham that we overwhelmingly support a private member's bill today, and we will do what we can to ensure that this bill successfully progresses through Parliament and does become, in fact, legislation. In fact, as an honourable lady will know, that we did have a debate on this very issue just a few short weeks ago, where we invited the government to reconsider its plans to reduce the number of members of Parliament, and I also invited and encouraged them to have a look at what is actually going on in the state of our democracy in Parliament. Because there's something that we profoundly believe, and that is there is no case whatsoever in increasing the number of unelected lords in that absurd institution down the corridor while cutting the number of elected parliamentarians decided by the people. It is simply absurd to have a situation in this mother of parliaments where there are more parliamentarians appointed by a Prime Minister than directly elected by the people. That is the cornerstone and the basis of our objection to what the government are doing with this boundaries. But of course, we don't want to be here. We don't want any members from Scotland coming down to this Parliament. We actually have this slight hankering that the Scottish people are probably better placed than the Westminster Tories to run the nation of Scotland. And I sort of actually got this hankering too that the people of England could maybe just about muddle past without us coming down weekly to involve ourselves in their affairs. That's where we start. But as long as we belong in a UK unitary Parliament, as long as this House exercises significant and real powers over our nation, it is right and proper that we have the correct numbers of parliamentarians from Scotland to look after the vital interests of our nation and to look after our own institutions. Yes, I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
On the issue of the House of Lords, I agree with much of his criticism of the Lords, but does he want to see the second chamber abolished or reformed?
I think you have to start with abolition, I'll say to the honourable gentleman. I think you can't reform. It's unreformable. It is an absurd circus. But what I'm not a unicameralist. I believe a nation as complex as the United Kingdom requires a scrutinising chamber. I know some of my honourable friends take a different view. That's my own personal view. So I would suggest that we do need a scrutinising chamber which is properly elected. But on that, Madam Speaker, what an embarrassing humbling this government secured in the last day. You know, to withdraw the Strathclyde Commission. You cannot take on the boys in Ermine and get done like that as they were done yesterday. And the overwhelming defeat, the embarrassing defeat at the hands of the House of Lords is something I think that this government is going to have to consider. You know, taking on the aristocrats. I mean, these guys won battles in the medieval ages to exercise their rights to rule over us. To sending the bumptious Lord Strathclyde to try and tame them. You know, we got the result of all of that, and I hope that the government really do reconsider their approach to the Lords. But all they're going to do is actually increase the members. We now face the prospect of the Dark Lord Farage coming in the next few days. The bad Baron, boot them out of here, is going to be a feature of our democracy. Somebody who was beaten 8 times in Westminster contest might find himself a parliamentarian through the back door. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful. I mean, just on that point, he's making about appointments to the Lords. Does he think that the system of appointing by the Prime Minister is an example of the royal prerogative being abused and used irresponsibly?
See, that is a very, very good point from my honourable friend. And yes, it is, as we're into a debate about the exercise of the royal prerogative, let's consider that one, because that is a very interesting point that my honourable friend made. But the bad Baron Farage, he'll be joining 800 or so are some of the weirdest parliamentarians you will find anywhere in the world, in the second largest chamber in the world. It's not just the cronies and the donors and the party placemen who will be joining us, the Church of England bishops, the aristocrats, and even worse than that, the Liberal Democrats. The chamber of unelected horrors, Madam Deputy Speaker. So in the next Parliament, if the House of Lords continues to increase in the way that it has, we face the real prospect that there may be something approaching 1,000 unelected Lords to scrutinise the work of 600 members of Parliament. We'll almost have 2 unelected parliamentarians for every one elected one. And we have the gall to lecture the developing world about the quality of their democracy. Now, the main case for this government in doing this is to try and reduce the cost and the size of politics. And of course, they're not. It's quite clear that they're not. The cost of politics is increasing exponentially, not year on year, month by month. We've now heard about the armies of civil servants that are going to have to be created to staff the new departments to deal with this government's chaotic Brexit plans. SPADs have been increased by something like 20% in the course of the past few years. The 250 donors, cronies and placement that they put into the House of Lords. And what's the savings for this? I think the Honourable Lady said it, and the Minister claims 66 million, but I believe that's over 5 years, but it's closer to £12 million. That won't even pay for the paint on a Trident missile when it comes to making savings. And so what we're seeing... Yes, of course, I'll give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very powerful speech. I'm fortunate enough to sit on the Exiting the EU Select Committee. Is he aware that we heard evidence earlier this week that the cost of Brexit is actually going to increase civil service and bureaucratic costs across the United Kingdom?
Well, yes, and we know that. We've heard again and again by all sorts of ministers the need for new civil servants, and I know they're being hastily recruited. The cost of politics is going up, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the government claimed to be cutting it. The only part of politics in Parliament they're cutting is the elected part. That's the only one that they seem to be featuring on. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman. Yes.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and I actually share his view that the House of Lords should be abolished. I've always believed that, and I've tried for reform, and I will continue to push for reform and abolition. But does he not accept that the cost of running the House of Lords in 2010 was £112 million, and last year that had fallen to £96 million? So there's been a 14% reduction, and I'm not defending it because I think it should be abolished. But this government has actually overseen a reduction in costs of the House of Lords.
Here's a solution for the Honourable Gentleman, given he's halfway towards me when it comes to my position on all this. How about saving £100 million per year then? Get rid of the circus. then we're all happy. Then, you know, the modest savings here and there, yeah, that's fine. But let's make substantial and significant savings. And the way that we could do this is just getting rid of that monstrous place around the corridor. I give way to Honourable Friend.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. And does he agree with me that one of the key issues was highlighted in recent weeks by Andrew Lloyd Webber, the peer, who wasn't actually aware that he was going to have to be a working peer and has been complaining about that, and that it is not right that peers are put in the House of Lords that don't work, and the number of working parliamentarians are being reduced by this government.
And I could just hear the heart's bleeding of my honourable friends at the news of the poor overworked Andrew Lloyd Webber. But this is where we are. We know what we do in this House. We know the value we give our constituents. We know how hard work. And I was listening very carefully, and I think it must have been Honourable Young from Wellingborough who talked very eloquently about the new tasks and functions that we have as members of Parliament. And that's right. We have new things that we have to do. We know how hard we work, and it's almost disgraceful when we observe what happens in the House of Lords with people refusing to turn up and even complaining about having to turn up to go about their work. But I want to talk a little bit about, and I think it was the Honourable Member from Newport West that first raised this point, about the findings of the Electoral Reform Society, because that's very, very powerful information where they say there could be a crisis of scrutiny, where 23%, if these boundary proposals go through, 33% of all MPs could have ministerial jobs. This will mean that there will be fewer backbenchers to scrutinise the work of government. This will have an impact on our select committees. Now, somebody mentioned the Scottish Parliament. We know in the Scottish Parliament that members of the Scottish Parliament have to double up on several committees. That's a feature of this. It's never been a feature of this House, but that might be a reality that might be confronting us in the future, where members of Parliament won't be expected just to serve on one committee, not on two committees, but perhaps on three committees. committees in order that this government could be scrutinised, because it could end up with the case that 34% of all Conservative members might be in the government payroll. Now, that is just not good for democracy. It's appalling for scrutiny. It might be very good for some Conservative backbenchers who are looking for career prospects, but it's not good for this nation, and it's not good for what we're doing here. And we also got the point, and a couple of other members have mentioned this too, we're doing this at exactly the wrong time. 73 members of the European Parliament will no longer be carrying out really important functions for us in Brussels and in Strasbourg. That means the powers that these exercise, the responsibilities that they currently hold, will be returned to an ever smaller pool of members of Parliament here. Now, that will mean more and more work. It will mean more work on select committee, it will be more work on scrutinising. I don't know how the Conservative backbenchers are going to find time to do all this, but it will be a real issue. This was a plan that was dreamt up pre-Brexit. Now, the new government have been very good at binning all the Cameroon nonsense that went forward, and they've got their own clear agenda and their view about how government should proceed. Here's an invitation. Bin this one. Put it on the bonfire of the nonsensical Cameroonian legislation and make their own decision. It was a plan that was concocted pre-Brexit. It's no longer fit for purpose in the new real world that we live in now. And can I also say to the Honourable Lady that we do support her idea about the equalisation of constituencies. I don't think any of us have any real concerns about equalisation, but they must take into account geography. And in Scotland we have some particular... Oh, I've got the Let me see. I'll come to first. I'll come to the Honourable.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, my Honourable friend, for giving way. He's making a very powerful speech. But on this issue of geography, I mean, the fact that we have the Highlands, where 3 MPs are going to be representing 33,000 kilometres, 40% of the landmass of Scotland, with less than 5 MPs. And each of those 3 seats, it's going to be about 180 miles across each one of them, 4.5 hours across each constituency. How on earth are people supposed to be properly represented when it's going to be so difficult for any elected member of Parliament to get round that constituency? Argyll and Lochaber is going to have more than 30 islands. Why are we not including the islands off the west coast of Scotland in the constituencies that are protected as well as the other ones?
Honourable, I think we should hear from the other part of the Highlands, Madam Speaker.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend in giving way. And we heard this morning that these ludicrous proposals include the meaninglessly named Highland North, a constituency pointed out by my honourable friend would be as big as Northern Ireland. Is my honourable friend, I'm sure he is aware, that the other constituency, Inverness and Skye, the proposed constituency, would be the size of the country of Greece. Now, would he agree that it's not only, it wouldn't be Aristotle that would be needed to point out that's bad philosophy, but Thales would surely point out that that's very bad geographically.
Eloquently put by my honourable friend. All I could say is I've got a very modest 80 miles east to west in my constituency, and it feels decisively small compared to the challenges and issues of both my honourable friends. But I'm grateful for them for making that point, because it does come to emphasise this thing that we're saying, that when we are equalising constituencies, we do have to take into account our geography, particularly the very challenging geography that we have within the Scottish Highlands and Islands. Yes, of course, I'll give way to you.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And does he also agree with me that this is about identity? And my constituency of Livingston, which is in the county of West Lothian, prides itself on being very unique and being between 2 great cities, Edinburgh and Glasgow. But changing it to Edinburgh, Pentlands and Livingston makes it sound as if it's just an extension of Edinburgh, which it absolutely is not.
Yeah, we've heard that again and again in the course of this morning. My honourable friend's absolutely right. I mean, what is fantastic, and one of the key features, I'll talk about things when they go right in this House. One of the things that we did get right is this constituency link. It's a wonderful, marvellous thing that we've got, where we have the privilege of representing constituencies in defined areas, where we build up a relationship with them over the years. I've had the pleasure of being a member of Parliament in this House for 15 years. I've got to know my constituents. I get to know exactly the type of issues they bring to me. I get a sense of having represented them for so long, the type of things that interest them. And so this is a very valuable feature that we have, and to toy with it and to try and erode that constituency link, I believe is a really negative and bad thing. Madam Deputy Speaker, when I was first elected, there were 72 Scottish members of Parliament. If this goes through, there will be 53. That's almost a quarter of Scottish members of Parliament that we'll have lost within that 10 years. Now, some of that was necessary, and I accept, because we've got the Scottish Parliament. It was thought that they should reduce the number of members of Parliament here. That's right and proper. But to have 53 to represent an area the size of Scotland, I think is really, really going to be demanding and challenging for so many of our honourable friends. But I think I mentioned in the last debate that we're going to have more members of the House of Lords from Scotland than we will have members of Parliament if these go through. I think I detected 61 Lords with registered Scottish addresses. And I've done a little bit more research since I made those comments, Madam Deputy Speaker, because what I've since found, I've got 5. For this one solitary member of Perth and North Perthshire, I've got the benefit of 5 members of the House of Lords. So I'm sort of thinking, what we should maybe think about doing, Madam Deputy Speaker, just to be equitable about all this. How about equalising the House of Lords along with the House of Commons? And I'd quite happily gift some of my Lords to urban constituencies that might not have the benefit of one of them serving them. So maybe let's start to think about how we could do all that. And I give it, when people ask us, what would you do with the Scottish Lords when you become independent? Well, can I put the House's mind at rest to this? As a parting gift, as a gesture of our largesse, we are quite happy to donate the Scottish Lords to the rest of the United Kingdom. We cannot get more generous than that. I'll finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, by just sort of saying a little bit what I think this is all about. I don't actually believe it's about reducing the cost of Parliament, because it's peanuts, really, in the terms of budgets. It really doesn't really account to much at all. It's all to do with trying to stymie the Labour Party. That's exactly what's behind this at all. And if you speak privately to Conservative members, and they've come to me and told me this, that's what it is about. To ensure that they'll never get the Labour Party back in government again. Let's do this now when they've got a majority, and that's why they're doing this. But can I say to the Conservatives, the Labour Party really do not need any assistance to become an electoral liability. They're doing it perfectly well on their own. They do not need Conservative assistance when it comes to these sort of things. So let them get on with making themselves unelectable, because they're doing a fantastic job. But can I say, in doing that, and trying to stymie the Labour Party in the way they're doing, they are starting to erode the quality of our democracy. Yeah. And that is the dangerous thing with all the other knockabout stuff that we've got. When you start to muck about with something which seems to be working quite well, which is one of the defining features of this House and the way that we do business here, you start to undermine and pick it away at the things that make these things good. And to leave that monstrosity in its current condition, which should be a national embarrassment and embarrass every single member of this House, is an absolute and utter disgrace. There's things that we need to do to improve our democracy, to improve our public life in this country. One of the things is not unpicking the great things that happen in this way about a representative democracy, but is absolutely everything in dealing with that absurdity down the corridor.